Hi everyone. So prep time's over. Can I just please check if all teams are here? So I want to check from opening government first.
Opening government here.
Great. Opening opposition.
Here.
Closing government.
Here.
And closing op.
We're here.
Great. Thank you to OO and OG for sending over your speaking order. I'd like to ask all teams to do the same. Once that's done, we shall get started.
Excuse me, George, can I configure my Wi-Fi for a bit?
Yeah, sure. I'm just typing in the speaking order. Okay, great. Thank you to all teams for sending over your speaking order. I think we can go with judge roll call first, and then after that, we'll just make sure that everyone's here. So my name is Judah. I am going to be your chair for this round. Him pronouns, and I think we can go on to the other judges. So Adip, are you here?
Yes, Adip here.
Could you please introduce yourself? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Adip Fatin.
Yeah.
And I'll be a panelist in this round.
Thank
my
you.
gender pronouns, I don't have any gender pronouns.
Okay, thank you. Anggun?
Here.
Great. And finally, Shafa.
Yes, I'm here. My name is Shafa from Universitas Lampung as a trainee in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so before we get started, as all teams know, this is live stream, so can everyone please turn on their videos? Once that is done, we will get on with the third round of NUDC. So still waiting on one speaker from OO. Okay. So just waiting on CO now to turn on your video. Closing opposition. Closing opposition, we will need you to turn on your video. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. For the other speaker of closing op, okay, so you're both all right, thanks. Okay, so hi everyone. I think we can just get started now. A reminder, it's 7-minute speeches. Please accept and give POIs as they are a useful tool of engagement. With all that out of the way, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister. You're here.
Okay, I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, I need to set my camera first. Okay, gender pronouns he or him, and PI preference to chat. Don't unmute yourself. So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize that in status quo, Indonesia is a country that is rich of culture, especially its art, ladies and gentlemen. We have traditional dances, we have traditional batik, for example. We have dangdut. That is to say, dangdut is also the exclusivity of Indonesian genre that there is no other country have a dangdut, for example. But we think that those kind of culture is a lack of exposure, or even if it is already exposed exposed and internationalized, it just be there as it is, ladies and gentlemen. Because currently we live in a world where there is a lot of glorification of Western. There's a massive glorification of Western culture. That is to say, for example, the reasons why Hollywood are rising right now, because it is glorified, that it is glorified in society, it is internationalized in all of countries. For example, this is why the culture of US, for example, are rising in status quo, right? But we believe those kind of contexts are having two problems in currently. First, our culture are hidden under the westernization that exists by glorification by those contexts, ladies and gentlemen. But second of all, maybe there's also some acknowledgement from other countries that try to steal our culture, like how Malaysia, for example, are going to steal our batik, for example, just because it is lack of internationalization of batik, for example, and lack of acknowledgement that this is from Indonesia as our identity, ladies and gentlemen. This is why, let's go on to my models. This is why our stance is clear that we want to prefer Indonesian art community to significantly support to internationalizing traditional cultures. So what is the picturizations under both sides? We think that under our side of the house, we will do significantly internalization, like promoting our culture in foreign event, ladies and gentlemen. We'll hold an event of international college, for example. We will promote batik, for example, that, oh, this is the identity of Indonesia. You need to be introduced by this. We promote the viral dangdut songs like Ojo di Bandege by Farel, for example, in international event, so that international people are able to know that this is the culture of Indonesia, and by that make it Indonesia as famous country. What will happen in opposition? We think that in oppositions, they will not promoting the culture of Indonesia. Rather, they will promote non-Indonesian genre or style like hip hop or even something like that, right? An Indonesian song, for example, but it is not our culture, pop Indonesian, and so on and so forth, right? Notice that this is value judgment debate. This is to say that our burden is to prove why then it is beneficial for a lot of actors. That is why we are going to take this debate, right? So a lot of argument in my speech, three argument in my speech. First of all, let's talk about what is the characterizations of community of Indonesian art community and why then it is beneficial for them, right? We believe that the characterization of art community is that they are created because they embolden Indonesian culture, ladies and gentlemen. What does it mean? It means that the inherent interest of Indonesian art culture is to promote and maintain the sustainability of art, of Indonesian art in local Indonesian or even in international level, ladies and gentlemen. So the next question is that why then is better under our side of the house? I think it is better under our side of the house because we are the one who are able to significantly promote and maintain the sustainability of our culture in international level, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. Maybe opposition will talk about, oh, it is not lucrative because your culture will not sustain at all. You will not have any pendengar, for example, of international, maybe international people will not like it, and so on and so forth. But we prove you that it will not be like that. It will be sustained at all because under two reasons. Firstly, we have exclusive and unique culture, ladies and gentlemen. Parallel example given, the reasons why K-pop is rising because they are unique and very exclusive. There is no country that have K-pop, for example. Then they are able to have a market and so on and so forth. Under our side of the house, we are able to create a unique and exclusive culture, for example, meaning that we are able to create our market in international, right? But second of all, even if it is not sustained, we think that it is still fine because first, at least we protect and we maintain our identity. We will seek for the acknowledgement, for example. But second of all, we think that without without significantly promoting that things. A lot of alternative, like for example Nikki that promoting their own Indonesian song, for example. We think that it is not necessarily for Indonesian art community to significantly support the other non-Indonesian genre, but before that POI from OO.
Yeah, K-pop is literally pop song using Korean language, so it's hip hop.
Yes, that is the reason why under our side of the house we will not promote it, because under maybe it is also hip hop, but maybe it is also represent the culture of Indonesia. Language is also part of culture, right? That is the reasons why under our side of the house we will also promote our culture. But second of all, let's talk about the problem in status quo. In status quo, we talk about the westernization, like Hollywood are existing. This has happened because society follows the trend, ladies and gentlemen. Indonesian society are following the trend of Western. They don't want to be perceived as kuno and so on and so forth. That is why they like K-pop and so on and so forth, right? This is bad because it makes narrative the status quo culture of Indonesia is bad, or it is outdated, or kuno and so on and so forth. Why then this is better under our side of the house? This is better because the moment we internationalize our culture, first we will have two things. First, we will seek the acknowledgement from international people, that we will seek the acknowledgement of batik or even viral dangdut songs, that this is our identity as Indonesian country, for example. But second of all, this is important because the moment we are able to get acknowledgement from others, from international people, we will create a narrative that, oh, our culture is cool, ladies and gentlemen. We will able to rebranding our culture. That is to say, under our side of the house, we will eradicate the narrative of our culture is kuno and so on and so forth. This means that under our side of the house, the benefit is that under our side we are able to protect the sustainability of our culture in our local community, in our Indonesian people, and so on and so forth. Right? This is important because we need to maintain our identity, and this is important because it leads to second argument why then this is beneficial for the future of Indonesia. We think that social context is that the reasons why K-pop rising, they are able to touch the market of international. That is why South Korea, for example, are having a lot of income from K-pop, for example, because the K-pop sell their albums, for example. Also tourism, they attract more tourists to South Korea due to K-pop and so on and so forth, right? This is the reason why this is important, because the moment we are able to promote our culture, we are able to promote tourism or even more profit for the future. Maybe in the future, if we are able to sell more batik, for example, as it are able to create income from Indonesia, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for that speech, and I'd like to welcome the LO. Here.
Hi, is this audible for everyone?
Yes.
All right, cool. Let me set up my timer. Should I pronounce they or them? Please POI do it on chat. Right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. We say it's enough for Indonesian government and millennial like us to slit the spirituality coming from people who feel that their culture is the one that correlated toward their soul, and that this is one, for example, just for the sake of popularity, like what OG tried to argue. A bit of setup before I go to my cases, because I think that it's quite messed up coming from OG. Firstly, I think it's quite clear that the debate is not about do we want K-pop or not, or something like that, because K-pop is literally pop hip-hop song that literally is supported inside opening opposition. So if there is a sense of a certain culture inside of hip-hop song or movie like KKN in Desa Penari, that's literally what we supported in our side. So I don't understand why in their side of the house it's something that can be done, or something that will be supported. I think it's quite clear that in their side of the house they need to eventually kind of support a certain authentic song, like maybe Farrell with the dangdut song, for example, or something like that, maybe traditional dance or something like that. But I will argue that in future, why there is a prerequisite in terms of assimilation, but in opening government case in and of itself, it's already a concession. There need to be a certain adaptation toward this non-Indonesian genre for it to be popular. So I think that opening government case already falls in this debate. So two ideas in opening opposition. Firstly, which side we gain better exposure? Secondly, why is it a form of disrespect to our traditional value? A bit of clarification before that. I think promoting culture is not exclusive coming from only internationalizing traditional culture. I think representation of Indonesian artists is also some part of a culture internationalizing, or like an exposure, for example. Why is that so? We see this on Nicki, we see this on Rich Brand, for example, that argue in terms of what kind of Indonesian culture exists, that you should come to Indonesia to see the wonderland and wonderfulity of Indonesia, for example. So I don't think it is exclusive case if they all want to say that we want to popularize Indonesia. I think in our set of thoughts we can also done that. Hence the clashes of which side of the popularity can eventually be gained, and in terms of what kind of value do traditional value have, should be taken into account in this particular debate. Firstly, which side do we gain better exposure? I will firstly argue that why non-Indonesian genre is far easier to be popular in the idea of general society in the world, for example. Firstly, I think the notion of westernization and globalization is quite clear coming from Prime Minister, and that's literally a backlash in their side of the house. Why is that so? Because if the one that is globalizing and westernizing, we have a notion or narrative of westernization, is literally all country in the world, I have a huge amount of questions in terms of what kind of funding and what kind of mechanism Indonesia able to do to eventually counter this kind of narrative coming from other countries in itself. I think there's a huge popularity even from Gen Z, for example, which a huge amount of fear of missing out to eventually keep on following the Western culture instead of the traditional culture they exist in their own country, for instance, and so on and so forth. But secondly, I think for the consumer coming from Western nation or those kind of international citizens, there's also a lack of relatability toward the culture that you will expose in your side of the house. Let's just say there is a recency bias for an individual to eventually keep on converting towards something that you already consume currently. It looks like individuals do not want to eventually change anything coming from what they already consume. This is why we love pop so much, because we already used to this kind of genre, and it's quite hard for us to eventually shift genre to other things because it's already earworm in our head, for example, or something like that. Secondly, it's also about social media algorithm, where there is a worldwide engagement in terms of the pop or hip hop genre, for example, in comparative to traditional culture, where literally traditional culture require their own genre to eventually be popular. It is quite hard for social media community, for example, to insert it as algorithm if the head start of the amount of people that want to consume it is not that many to begin with. Hence, there need to be a head start in terms of the amount of people that want to consume it in international citizens first before the social media algorithm want to eventually take into account. Hence, it's very hard for us to eventually enter that. Thirdly, perceivement of what is cool, globalization and westernization, I think is quite clear. Why then culture is far harder than? I think that's for reasons. Firstly, there's no much platform. There need to be head start both in funding as well as marketing. There's no much company that want to enter first. I know that CG will eventually argue that Nikki already rich, but notice this thing. In your side of the house, you require a far bigger budget in comparative to individuals that already have the head start of budget. Hence, there's need to be a redistribution of tax if you want to fund this. Hence, you also harming the citizen because there's no much return on investment in your side of the house. Secondly, there's a barrier as well in terms of mysticality. Am I allowed to enter and enjoy it if it is something that inherently very mystical and correlated to the deceased one, the dead one, the soul, for example? Even if there is individual that want to consume it, it is far niche because there's only several individual in West, for example. It's similar to wayang culture, that the viewer is only like 500,000 maybe at best in Western, for example, in comparative to 5 million or 10 million in comparative to that. I think there's also limited room of exploration. Hence, it's quite hard for us to actually create a robust improvement coming from traditional art that you want to eventually come into. What is the impact of this? 5 layers. Firstly, comedy interest to TV are far better in our set of the house. They used to the model. They have multiple analysis and decades of long of data of what working and what not. It means it's less risky for them to invest. Hence, chances for RT to thrive are higher in our set of the house. Hence, representation point of Nikki singing Merdeka in their concert, for example, ITB Jakarta, for example, that attract a lot of tourists to come to Indonesia to eventually experience wonderful Indonesia like what you want to have in your side of the house. Secondly, role model for children as well, because it means that in our side of the house we have the increase of artists, encouragement for them that they able to eventually thrive in comparative to you eventually being boiled down to say that you need to promote your traditional culture without any certainty. This is why when you pursue sastra Jawa, for example, it's unlikely for your parents to eventually follow you and support you. Thirdly, we'll argue merely popular in best case of opposition is not a benefit. Before that, PICG.
Can JKT48 bid twice in an oversaturated pop market?
Both are pop. Moving on, we will argue merely popular in best case of opposition is not a benefit. Why is that so? Inside opposition, there's a notion of authenticity that you can only experience or see this kind of dance coming from the experts who know the core value in our side of the house, because there's no much assimilation or integration or even adaptation of the culture. Why is that? It's a benefit in the side of the house. The benefit is that you need to exclusively come to Indonesia to experience the nuance of originality in comparative to active adaptation in their side of the house. Where it becomes active adaptation, every company can eventually produce this. This is literally why batik are not exclusively sell only from Batik Semar, for example, but you can buy batik in Malay. You can buy batik in European, for example, if there is a company. The notion of white culture where everyone can experience this and can produce this eventually is a loss in our set of us because it becomes a global culture instead of Indonesian culture and specific. Second idea then, why is it a form of disrespect of our traditional value? What is the notion of this argument? Traditional culture correlated to many soul-connected experience. Then like Bedoyo correlated on how the disease this one connect to the living one. Some motif of batik correlated into diverse meaning. The prerequisite of popularity is adaptation in order to be inclusive, like what I argued earlier. Why does it become a problem? That is to say, there need to be cultural assimilation and integration. This is a huge amount of insult to those who believe that there's hate culture, because you need to adapt it to the Western culture that they hate so much because of the maybe certain xenophobic nuance or something like that, because of the past culture oppression that they have happened in Portuguesism, for example, and colonization, where they're being suppressed every day in terms of experiencing their culture and expressing by themselves. This is why in our side of the house, we protect the spirituality of people that is much more vulnerable, because they are the one that is very connected in the piece of heart, for example. This is why when Sultan Amrin dance in Drag Race, for example, there's a huge amount of backlash coming from the origin or local community, because they feel that this is not correlated and not in line with their belief of the gender, for example, that they have in their nuance, for example. It is maybe not for us, but it's for them who really feel that the culture are connected with the soul and connected to their life. Those is not points.
Thank you to the LO for that speech. And now I'd like to welcome the DPM. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Gender pronoun she or her, POI, 3 chat. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Culture is our identities and we want to protect it. It is a heritage from our ancestor. We don't want it to go just like that, especially when Indonesia, our community, they are specified in Indonesia culture. We question what's the difference between the other culture community in compare with Indonesia culture community. If under opposition's bench, they never like really upholding and highlighting our very own culture in the end of the day, right? We think that there's a misconceptions in OO. We say that even if it is Indonesian culture with traditional culture, it still can adjust with what happened in status quo. For example, batik in status quo is not as traditional as it used to be. You still can use it as a daily wear and so on and so forth. We think that exactly under our side of the house, we will trigger this society or even this community to having more ideas on adjusting the traditional culture in order to able to be accepted in the society. We think that under OO, they will only stuck under the bubble that, oh, this traditional culture will stay still traditional and so on and so forth. There will be no time for them to make it adjust and so on and so forth. Exactly, we questions how under opposition's bench there will be the existence of culture preservations, because under the side of the house, this culture, this traditional culture will seem just like that. We think that it will giving less attractions towards the society and current generations. We don't want it to be happen. One debattles to maybe for jump to my extensions. They try to claim on how K-pop is a hip hop song and so on and so forth. It's a hip hop song but only using a different language and so on and so forth. It will be better under the side of the house because because they will be able to adjust with the hip hop and whatsoever, right? Firstly, understand that even language in itself is a culture, right? Moreover than that, we think that it is important when we promoting our traditional Indonesian culture, because culture from every country is different. They having their own unique point. We think that this unique point that Indonesian traditional culture have is going to attract people to to come to our country for the sake of it will benefit and tourism, for example, and so on and so forth, right? It only could be happen under our side of the house. And we do believe that we still can counter the westernizations, because even in social media currently, there are a viral dangdut songs in TikTok that used by foreigner. It is proof that it still happen in any way, especially in this current world where everything is so easily to be spread. Within that, when we are able to make it viral, for example, it will be well known, and with our own unique point, it will make the foreigner love our culture in the end of the day, right? We think that it is going to worsen in opposition's bench, because when they like using the hip hop song like what Western do, we think that there will be more instead of they are being proud of their songs, that their hip hop songs, what's going to be happen is that there will be more comparisons between the Western song and their own hip hop song in the end of the day, right? What's going to be happen is that there will be no development such of thing in the culture that they want to highlight in the very first place, right? That's why we don't want it to be happen. moving on to my that's called my rebuttals. Moving on to my extensions, how we are able to help the small business in Indonesia. What is Indonesia culture actually? It's not only about song, but it's also about clothes such as batik or kebaya, for example. We think that under our sort of the house, when we are able to make it like internationalized, we are able to make it trending whatsoever, it will attract more people to use our culture. Which is important because it will mix like the traditional batik makers, for example, are like getting like more income and whatsoever, right? We think that it only could be happen when society are finally see batik as something that as something that trendy, for example, and that's why we think that it's only going to be happen under our side of the house, because what's going to be happen under OO is that they will see batik as something that that very old, for example, it is not adjustable with the current daily life and so on and so forth. We think that what's going to be happen is that this time the stigma that this traditional culture cannot be used in a daily wear and so on and so forth. We think that it will also impact this small business in Indonesia. Moreover than that, when we are able to show to you about the unique tradition of our own country, it will attract more tourism, because the reasons why tourists or foreigners are want to come to certain countries because they find the unique angle of its countries. We think that under our Sabta house, when we are able to attract more tourism, it will add the money of the countries, the APBN negara, for example, and this money could actually be used for the culture preservation. Why it won't be happen in the word of opposition Spanish? It won't be happen under the side of the house because under the side of the house, they will give a portrayal that Indonesia is just the same like any other countries. For example, Indonesia have no unique culture. Indonesia song is just like the same with the other country and so on and so forth. That's why we think that under the side of the house they cannot attract more tourism, right? Moving on to my second extension, talking about how it will incentivize the government to take care of Indonesian culture. Indonesian government currently are too focused on development on its country. They are too focused on the digitalizations of country, for example. Under OG, when we make our culture becoming a highlight, there will be an additional interest from government to take care of Indonesian culture, because they see that, oh, Indonesian culture is something that promising in the end of the day, right? We think that it will lead into certain benefit. For example, government will start to help like such as free class of traditional dance, for example, and so on and so forth. We think that it is important because we need to keep this heritage from our ancestors that is priceless. For generations to generations, because when we are able to like maintaining the culture from generations to generations, we think that it will make our next generations are know about their identity, they know about their culture, they know how valuable it is, and so on and so forth, and they will start to appreciating it. We think that it is so important because under our side of the house, when it start to be a norm, for example, then society will start to acknowledge about our culture whatsoever. We think that it is better for its country in itself, more than proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you to the DPM for that speech. To end off top half, I welcome DLO.
Check. Sorry. Checking, is this audible?
Yep, this is audible.
Thanks. So yeah. PI takes through chat, he can pronounce. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. I'll talk about 3 things in this speech. First, I'll talk about the saturation of market responding directly to the POI of CG. Second, I'll talk about how do we make Indonesia popular and why that is a prerequisite for any any prerequisite for even any traditional culture to be popular in the first place. But lastly, why cultural appropriation is going to be massive on-site government, and why that is something that we ought to regret today's debate. Firstly, let's talk about the saturation of market, because I think POI from CG might be valid to say that it's not easy to compete against big names in the Western market. There are three responses as to why it's actually likely to compete. The first thing to say is that there are many segmentation of a market that exists within status quo, i.e. people don't listen to only one artist, they listen to multiple different artists. If a popular song or if a good tone song is make them happy, for example, when they listen it to Instagram Reels or through TikTok, they would be happy listening to that song again, looking at it in Spotify, for instance, which means that it's not exclusive like what CGPI said about like GKT48 is going to always lose against Twice. It is a question of promotion, right? If you give a significant support for them to promote it as a good culture, if you like be able to promote it like what Nikki did, what Raya did, I think GKT48 might be even more popular than Twice, because that is a question of promotion, not a question of the quality of artists per se. We can compete in terms of quality. The question is popularity. Secondly, this is also a question of starting point, right? Insofar as gamelan songs or dangdut songs have a significant amount of barriers of entry, as what my prime minister, as what my LO has already mentioned. It is significantly difficult for you to even make people listen to gamelan in the first place, as opposed to people being exposed to Nikki and then finding out about who Nikki is and going to her concert and listening all about Indonesia from her interviews. That is the benefit that you can get from our side of the house. This is so exclusive to getting popular in the first place. So then this leads me to nicely to my second issue as to how you actually make Indonesia popular. The framing is very simple. Having a popular Indonesian culture means nothing if it didn't give anything back to Indonesia or even to the Indonesian artist community at large. You need money to sustain traditional arts even internally in Indonesia. So the prerequisite for any culture recognition internationally is in order for you to have money to sustain your own culture in Indonesia. If even in opening government you cannot get any money to sustain your own culture within your own country, that is already a harm that opening opposition never take a trade-off in. Okay, so let's firstly deal then why even in our case, like these are non-Indonesian traditional artists, why there are still Indonesian elements that is going to be promoted, why there are incentives to promote those values. I'll just point out to some examples first. This looks like Nikki, for example, singing the song Bendera in her concert, bringing flags of Indonesia. Rich Brian talking about his childhood in Indonesia in his interviews. This is like weird genius incorporating some notion of gamelan in their songs, for example, or Agnes Mo being proud of her identity as an Indonesian. There are two massive incentives why these celebrities are likely to do this. One, from an economic perspective, this is also a very lucrative thing to pull Indonesian Gen Z millennials into listening their own songs, because this is something that is going to be popular. For example, if they look at a hip hop songs that have gamelan elements in it, this is something that is very popular and very very catchy for a lot of Gen Z, for example, being used as music in TikTok and whatnot. But secondly, this is also going to be seen and going to get some degree of exposure in the international stage. Note that this is not a contradiction, because small element of gamelan is comparatively smaller in comparison to people listening to an entire gamelan song inside government, right? That is the comparative they need to deal with. You can incorporate some elements of culture, and actually artists have the incentives to incorporate it. The question in open government is why it has to be pure. Then they say in open government that there are tourism problems. The first thing I just want to point out is that you need to make Indonesian popular first before people coming to Indonesia. It is like Nikki telling that, about Indomie, for example, in her interviews that make people want to come to Indonesia. It creates traction when Indonesia gets popular within the Western eyes. That is when tourists want to come to Indonesia. The comparative is you can listen to gamelan in the United States. Why the hell would you care about coming to Bali when literally you can listen to all those cultures in your own country, right? You don't need to go to Indonesia to find batik. If you can buy it in a market in Germany, that is exactly when people are willing to go to Indonesia, when that culture is exclusive, when we brand our culture as something that is inherent to only our land. When people see Bali, for example, as a holy land that you can only experience Bali when you come to Indonesia, not by looking at a performance in the United States. That is the inherent uniqueness of value that we ought to promote as Indonesian art community, that gives us edge and creates incentive for tourists to come to Indonesia. Before I talk about cultural appropriation, I'll talk POI from CG, no? Okay, OG.
We think that without Indonesian art community, Nikki or Agnes Mo already enough to promote non-Indonesian genre, but no one promote our culture, so it is necessary for us as Indonesian art community. Why then it is urgent on yourself for Indonesian art community to promote it yourself?
Yeah, Nikki is popular, but like it's just 1-2 people, right? You need more in order for Indonesia to be more popular. But in your side of the house, there is massive barriers of entry. So with the same amount of money, you wouldn't get anywhere on your side. When our side, probably you already get some reports with HITC, like and like following the with relation to Niki, for example, that is the sort of promotion you can get on our side. On your side, the money is very limited, especially with the huge amount of barriers of entry. You need to first disprove that people can enter in, so that money would be worth it and can get back to Indonesian culture. So that money, therefore, can be used largely for the promotion of Indonesian culture within Indonesia itself, in order for you to be able to sustain your culture. Because if there is no support from the government whatsoever currently, you need a significant amount of money even to promote local culture, local tradition, and that is when the money from the success of promoting Western values come into promotion. Let's talk about cultural appropriation. Note that this house prefers what, which means that if we can show that the cultures that is going to be promoted, even at best, is a bad form of representation, we don't think that is something preferable in today's debate. I just want to put some context, right? Like batik, like what they pointed out, though, currently has been whitewashed to use Man United logos all over their clothing lines, right? They make batik as not very traditional. They try to put modern elements within batik that removes the essential value of that batik itself, for instance. Or for example, some elements that is trying to be Western or like even some very traditional dances that is being reclaimed in like drag races that is being used by a lot of performers in the United States. Why this harmful? Firstly, because a lot of this culture are inherently tied to certain traditions that is very, very inherent in individuals' beliefs and values. That is to say, you going on international stage without recognizing that there are some values that has to be promoted means that you are inevitably going to have to compromise some of the inherent values that is important to people, which lead to a significant amount of backlash and unpopularity even within your own local art community, especially if their own frame was to say that local art community is very traditional, you ought to preserve that value in and of itself before anything. But secondly, it's also easier for Western to actually claim your culture when it is internationalized. Malaysia can come to the United States and say, hey, look, this is my culture, when as opposed to if you can only see it in Indonesia, that is when you can brand it as an exclusive feature of our nation. For the promotion and for the recognition of our country, this is the best strategy that we can do. We're very proud of this.
Thank you to the DLO for that speech. Now I'd like to welcome the member of government. Here, here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I will accept POI through chat, probably one from opening opposition. Don't have gender pronouns. I will start my speech in 3. Timer. Wait. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Several important setup in opening in closing government to cleaning up the messy debate in opening. 1. Under our side, we prefer to live in the world where all Indonesian art community to internalizing traditional Indonesian culture. What does it will look like under side CG? 3 mechanization. 1. We will focus to integrate the style and genre of the art and music that we promote and use in our career and performance as an artist. This looks like, yeah, the using of tarik kecak and the promotion of it, for example, to the white people. But 2, we more than willing to also reallocate resources as artist communities to, for example, do education, proselytizing the culture, or even do more tangible things such as funding the event, concert, and production of the new content of them. But lastly, capability or willingness should not be the debate, besides because this debate is clean slate and preferring a world, but we also talking about the same exact Indonesian art community, so their power to do advertisement, cooperate with third party, is all to give exposure, it also will be the same. The differences is what kind of content that you will promote in both sides. CG will prove why Indonesian culture is better. But 2, CG thinks that talking about money in opening debate is deadlocked in and not important because of 2 reasons. 1, benefit of money is really uncertain because it depends on a lot of externalities that you can't control as Indonesian art community. We're talking about the shifting of market trend that is so uncertain and predictable. We're also talking about the purchasing power of the international community that is so saturated in current context right now because they already have settled market, for example. But 2, exactly because market are already too saturated, there is no likelihood at all in opening opposition why you can compete with, for example, K-pop, for example, as an Indonesian art community, where you can compete with Ariana Grande or Taylor Swift that are settled and win a lot of Grammy, get a lot of exposure and starting point from a lot of media and journal, for example, and have a more good precedence in your side of the house. Closing government will enter this debate with more realistic benefit. We're talking about saving the most vulnerable actor regardless of the outcome. All rebuttal will intertwine one extension in my speech. Why this provides safe space for the vulnerable community? What is the context that I want to establish in my speech? What is the characterization that CG that missing in opening government? We're talking about who are Indonesian art community and what's their interest. Indonesian art community is not a company and pragmatic entity only. This debate is not as generic as opening debate told you. We're talking about people that live in Bali that learn and proliferate tari kecak. We're talking about sentra ukiran in Jepara and Kudus that lives in the rural area in North Java. We're also talking about people that genuinely cares about art and its sustainability. These people is more important than the opening debate discussion, because in CG we say that these people is really vulnerable because they don't have choices and platform, and they're the one that being the core of Indonesian art community to be protected. Why we then get platform? Why this is the case? 3 layers. One, they are most of the time minority. We're talking about specific community that lives decades with their culture. We're talking about middle, lower class that commercialize their culture in the past, but right now they can't do that because shifting of market trend that they can't control, especially when they are minority. They see as not lucrative market to invest on by people outside their community to spread their culture. That makes them have no leverage and power to compete in the market. But two, lack of exposure. These people is also the one that detach from modern market. We're talking about cooperation with production house and labels such as Universal, Sony, because in your side, this production house don't get exposure that this type of genre on people exist, or even if they know these people, since the market is too saturated, like OO said, modern genres such as hip hop overclouded them, Niki overclouded them. That is why when you not catering them as an Indonesian art community, there is no one that can accommodate them in your side. But three, there is no platform leads into external pressure. This is correlate with 2 layers that I explained before. Because in your side, since this is this traditional art get out-competed in your side, makes this community forced to live their culture and don't want to learn because they need to survive and their skill is intransferable. That's why even if these people really want to learn and spread their ancestor value, they can't do that because they forced to gain money and move to more beneficial field and content in capitalistic system. But even if, assuming but not conceding, that there is still people that want to uphold their value and stay in this field, exactly because their attachment to their culture, like what OO said, we said that the heart of cultural appropriation exactly exists in OO, because this debate is not happen in vacuum. It means if these people still want to uphold their culture, but at the same time survive in this market as an artist, what will they do? They will desperately cooperate with evil entity. What does it look like? It looks like cooperation with local production house that impose unfair and unclear contract, producer that want to exploit and taking benefit from them, like doing cultural appropriation and force them to making content that suit with the market. That I think evil entity that want to do cultural appropriation exists in both sides of the house. But the difference is it's even worse in your side, because it means right now these people, this community will obey and still cooperate with this evil entity because they don't have another choices, because you not accommodate them as Indonesian art community. Yeah, before that, sure.
Yeah, for internationalization, you also need contract with the big corporation, but to some extent your aim is to survivability, hence that literally means money. Why cannot we just popularize through suara gembira internally in Indonesia rather than outside?
Okay, move to my explanation about what does internationalizing look like under our side and why this is better. What is the conclusion of my 3 layers? It means these people is the most vulnerable people in art community, because if you want to talking about artists that want to use modern genre such as Nicky or Rich Brian, they're gonna survive anyway with or without your support as Indonesian art community. Exactly because the people is pragmatic and more flexible, it means most likely international production house such as 18/8 Rising want to hire them anyway in both sides, or they can collaborate and assimilate their music, because this is not cultural appropriation for these people. So at worst, we need to sacrifice part of our community that want to use these methods as an artist. They have another platform as an artist anyway. But how the benefit of safe space will manifest under CG answering DPI from LO? This link back to the motion about internationalizing, because when you try to advocate this culture, you will do care with these people. You try to protect their culture even more, because when you commercialize this culture, you will see this thing as a product, right? It means more urgency for these people to make sure that this product is sustainable and can be maintained well by proselytizing this culture in line with the ethic of their community. You give them exposure about how market works, for example. You give them representation. You give them more leverage in the mediation, for example, by giving more representation in law and the negotiation and contract, for example, preventing cultural appropriation to make sure they still have uniqueness and comparative advantage. So all the benefit of OO to prevent cultural appropriation exists when you give exposure of this culture to all people. This benefit is fly regardless the outcome of money. Because for this small community in Indonesia, what they need is not to be super rich or be billionaires, but the freedom and access to practice their culture and art. Funding to do concert, for example. Make sure that they still have place to concert and do their like dance, get platform to promote their ancestor value in front of whitewash people, make sure that they have enough money to survive, only enough money, and maintain their culture is our inherent benefit and fulfillment. So I think that if you want the answer and how we still cooperate anyway under CG, sure, but the difference is, like as Indonesian art community, you backing them up first by giving more exposure, by giving them more knowledge about how market works, for example, that at first these people don't have proud to opening house.
Thank you to the member of government for that speech. I'd like to welcome member of op.
Oh, wait. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, prepared in your pronouns are they or them. If you guys have any question, please just type it in the chat box. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think when we say that we want to internationalize the thing that we want to break in open opposition, it doesn't mean that we want to actually compete with Ariana Grande, like Nicki Minaj, and etc. Simply because I think in order for you to be famous, it doesn't mean that you need to win Grammy. It doesn't mean that you need to always topple down another person at the very beginning, right? I think it can go hand in hand. The moment that you can be famous, it can also do not win any kind of award at the very beginning, right? The thing that we want to do here is not actually like to win certain awards. What we want to do here is to at least that people internationally can be aware of the existence of Indonesian artists at the very beginning, right? Even if we are not representing the Indonesian value, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be okay, because at the end of the day, I think we're going to talk about on how the closing opposition is going to talk specifically, are going to talk about the status quo of Indonesian culture and why it's not actually like good in not ready for us to actually like international aid due to some internal problem that we need to solve first at the very beginning, right? Therefore, if the whole government bench are wanted to talk about on how we cannot actually compete with a lot of like Western artists that are already very famous, I don't think that is actually something that we need to actually like solve at the very beginning, right? Because we cannot actually like be famous with them. We cannot actually like exist hand in hand. For example, like we can exist in top hits and etc. without actually like winning against them at the very beginning, right? We can always exist together with them at the very beginning, right? So I'm going to talk about two major stuff here. The first one, I'm going to talk about the conditions of Indonesian culture and why it's not ready for internationalizing. Second, I'm going to talk about the idea of representations and why in government side house representation is something that's very, very much toxic. Last but not least, I'm going to take the base case scenario, and at the end of the day, I'm going to explain why the worst case of opposition is still going to be better compared to Gov. Before going there, rebuttals. I think that going to OG first, I think this is actually the premise that also brought by closing government. They talk about uniqueness. They believe that the moment that we are actually like promoting the Indonesian culture, that's something that's very much unique, can actually like be viable towards the international world or whatever, right? Just I don't want you to actually like buy into this idea at the very beginning, right? But in order for you to be famous, you need to actually like buy into like the whole international world once by the beginners, right? OO has already said this before, but I think this is going to be the unique contributions here, because the moment that you're actually only serving uniqueness, you're not going to be in a very famous like pop culture of them at the very beginners, right? You're only going to be put in the like alternate genre for them at the very beginners, right? We're going to buy it. Yeah, maybe you can still be famous even if you're an alternative to the very beginners, right? But at the end of the day, your famous will only be limited towards certain trend, simply because your alternative will not be viable for them every time to the very beginners, right? Because your uniqueness at the end of the day will make them bored to the very beginners, right? Therefore, the moment that you actually wants to make sure that Indonesian like art community wants to be sustainable in the international world, you need to always buy into what they want instead of serving uniqueness that they can be like very much bored of to the very beginning, right? Simply because this uniqueness is something that a lot of other countries also have to the very beginning, right? So at the end of the day, what you need to buy is actually what they want instead of serving this uniqueness that will only put you in the alternate genre at the very beginning, right? But second, let's talk about the cultural appropriation things that prevented by the closing government here, right? I think this is something that's very, very dismissive, simply because their only explanations on how they believe that they could actually like create contracts and etc. by the beginning. Right? I don't think that contract would actually like protect this culture from cultural appropriation, simply because cultural appropriation are not only done by the company that promoting it to the very beginning, right? But it also done by people who are actually like listen to it to the very beginning, right? It's done by individuals in the Western world, not only by the company. So regardless if we buy on them that they could actually like create contract by the company so that they don't do cultural appropriation, at the end of the day, it's still not going to protect this culture to be like harshened by the white people, for examples like we don't want in this debate of very beginning, right? So yeah, I don't think that the case of closing government cannot stand in this debate because yeah, going to my first argument here, talking about on how the Indonesian art is not ready for the internationalization, right? Let's look at it first. I think the moment that you're talking about Indonesian arts, we're going to talk about on how Indonesian people value the very beginning, right? Which means that we're talking about on how a lot of Indonesian people are very much conservative, is also followed by their culture the very beginning, right? Opening opposition are talking about on how they actually like wants to protect this to the very begin with, but I'm going to talk about on how by actually like imposing these things towards the Western culture, we're going to only making Indonesian gaining a lot of backlash because of these promotions very beginning, right? Simply because of the woke culture that's very much famous in the international world to the very beginning, right? The moment that you show towards the international world that there is a underage children talking about like love and etc., a lot of people will like call Indonesian singing love song in terms of like more educational song. It happens in Indonesia in 17 Agustusan before, right? What makes you think that in the international audience, which is very, very woke, will not actually do this to very beginners, right? Not to mention in terms of art, we can see here the wayang, barely any strong female representation is actually exists there to the very beginners, right? Shows that the moment that we are actually like internationalizing this kind of culture, this will only get a lot of clapback from the international audience, simply because it's not actually like viable towards what they want to the very beginners, right? And also towards their standard to the very beginners, right? It will lead into the idea that opening opposition has already brought, where they talk about on how it will be whitewashed at the end of the day, because we need to force the white value to be forced into this to the very beginners, right? Even if we need to change this culture, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot better if you don't internationalize this at all, simply because the discourse about changing this culture will only happen internally in Indonesian people only, by actually like nationalizing it to the very beginning instead of internationalizing it. That will make a lot of white people actually like joining to this thing at the very beginning, right? Second, I'm going to compare on how by actually like doing this, we can actually also take the whole benefit from the government side of the house, right? So the moment that we're actually like internationalizing Indonesian cultures, we're going to talk about on how making like more Indonesian singers movies to be more famous to very beginners. Like the moment that this happened, we can also invite people to actually like know our country. For example, it's like the moment that you actually love K-pop, you're going to follow your idol and you're going to see their life at the very beginning. Like the moment they actually expose their culture, a lot of people will fall in love with that. That they will come to our country at the very beginning. Right? But second, the moment that you're actually like doing this organically, like opening like the opposition wants, it's going to be a lot better, right? Because yes, we're not going to have as many fans of Indonesian culture like the government side of the house would have. But at the end of the day, the people that learn Indonesian culture will be the one that truly loves Indonesia at the very beginning, right? Because they love the authenticity of Indonesia that actually like promoted by the person organically at the very beginning, right? So even if we cannot actually like have too much like fans like the government side of the house wants, so that they can promote like tourism, which I believe is not actually the concern of Indonesian art community. But at the end of the day, we can actually like promote this at the end of the day and still going to like protect the essence of it by actually like cherry picking people who truly love Indonesian culture. I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you to the member of opposition for that speech. Now I'd like to welcome Government Whip.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Okay, cool. If you want to be aware, please do it on the chat box. I'll probably take one from opening if I have time. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, Two issues in the debate. Firstly, let's talk about opposition's cultural appropriation, because I think CEO still bring the same thing as the opening opposition. But before that, independent rebuttals, right? Opening opposition cannot say that batik will be a global culture, while at the same time they say that people know that Niki is from Indonesia and therefore promote Indonesia. The fact that people know that Niki is from Indonesia means that the average reasonable person have the capability to identify and distinguish the identity even for batik. Therefore, their argument about global culture cannot fly. Additional responses. Let's talk about cultural appropriation. Why is it likely? Why is it good, bad, and so on and so forth? My first response on the idea of cultural appropriation is no, guys. These people will not do cultural appropriation because we will happily not take the deep religious one. For example, batik have a different pattern. For example, there is the casual one that is being picked and used for a gorden or a bed sheet, but there is also one that is used for the rituals, and we will happily cater to that as well and pick the one that is appropriate for the use in the international world. But secondly, let's do an actor interest analysis, right? These are the people, if they say that these people are like isolationists, we don't think so, right? They want the culture to be spread out because literally people within the group are the one who create and proselytize this to the outer group, right? How does this look like? It looks like people from Jawa who they are the one who make the viral dangdut songs. Or for example, mothers who live in an isolated place in Jawa, these are the one who produce batik for the corporations for years, despite the demand to modernize the pattern, for example. This proves to you that there is an actor interest from this community who wants to proselytize and wants it to be spread out, right? The structural reason for this is twofold. Firstly, there is a pride of knowing that people know who they are, know who their identity is, for example, and appreciate them. But secondly, it also gives a validation to your appreciation of your culture. That I am not the one who only cares about this. That my appreciation to this is valid. That this culture that I am protected for decades is indeed cool. This is why we told you that the interest to spread out exists from within the actors. But the third response, let's flip appropriation, right? We believe that appropriation will exactly exist in opposition bench. Why? Because the moment the art community abandon traditional cultures, this is the moment you force people to abandon their way, abandon their traditional way into the shifting market, or otherwise, if they don't want to, they will die. For example, batik artisan makers who do not have transferable skill but to deal with fabric, for example, will be forced to cater to modern Uniqlo-irism. Or the dancers who are supposedly protect the traditional dance, you will force them into shifting the market into a hip-hop dance, or otherwise these people will die, for example. This is why our argument about safe space is grossly important because of twofold reason. Firstly, the moment we internationalize it, this is the moment we are going to put resources and knowledge to do marketing of that. This is the moment the demand of the traditional market will increase, for example, and therefore these people will not die. But secondly, the moment we internationalize this, we are going to conduct events outside Indonesia or within the Indonesia, but framing and branding it as an international cool stuff, right? This is the moment you as a traditional individuals have the space to exercise it. You will have the market because it seems cool, for example. This is what answers the opposition burden. That is when they say that the culture is not cool enough and therefore people do not want this. This is why we desperately need branding in order to increase the market in itself. We do not need to brand hip hop as cool because these are the thing that has already been cool anyway, right? This is but why they cannot do this in isolation, right? Because the standard of coolness in status quo, especially in urban area or places outside Indonesia, are international, right? We are talking about the international sphere of NYC, and we're also talking about Indonesian urban areas such as Jakarta or Surabaya, for example. Like, for example, Niki is not cool the moment she is in Dahsyat, for example, but she is now cool because she is in 88 Rising. Therefore, framing and branding things as international is very important, even if it is not true, for example. This is why our burden is not, for example, to take down the the pop culture, for example, but at least we are able to increase the market, and at least we are able to bring the pride that exists within Indonesians that they previously suppressed due to the international standard and the fact that they are minority in their respective states, for example, and therefore they will be the buyers and consumers and the practitioners of this respective culture. This proves to you that cultural appropriation exists worse in their side of the house, and we prove to you as to why the protection of culture will exist better in our side of the house. Before going further, opening.
In order for you to be able to protect culture, you need capital, you need incentive, even internally, that you can promote your culture within your own local community. If you don't have money for all that, what gives you certainty that these are going to be recognized even internationally?
Yeah, I feel you, but what's your comparative, right? In your side of the house, the traditional culture do not get any money. In our side of the house, you get the support and money from the art community because the corporations are unlikely to give them anyway. But compare that to hip hop, where corporations already care. But the next thing about appropriation is the moment we frame it as international and cool, this will also prevent the company demagoguery to force us to appropriate to the fullest extent, right? Because the moment you do appropriation that much, that's the moment the corporations lose the uniqueness and the market of them, and therefore it will be harmful to the company as well. This is why you need to frame it as cool traditional culture, and this is why you prevent appropriation better. But let's talk about the second issue. Let's deal with opening government's capitalistic model. Their explanation is about like unique famous acknowledgement, and it is the massive gridlock in opposition, right? Because they say that familiarity of genre matters more. The way to break this deadlock is market analysis. We analyze to you that pop genre is oversaturated, right? Who is our opponent? One, pop culture that has been established by Hollywood and K-pop, for example. Secondly, big corporations such as Sony and Universal, for example. Therefore, we cannot win unless we have a certain uniqueness as a comparative advantage. Literally, guys, if Oppo example is Lati, that's literally gamelan. Or their example is Coke Battle, that's literally traditional Bali dance, for example. Therefore, the prerequisite of opening government's benefit is our market analysis. But lastly, why our extension is what's the most important? We told you that a safe space for the cultural group is very important. There are two types of artists. One, the pragmatic one. The pragmatic one is not very important because the pragmatic ones are catered by the corporations who are profit-oriented, and if the market is so big, they will be catered anyway. Secondly, the people who cares about art and culture, that's the way the people who art community should have cared about, because these are the people who have no other alternative but to be catered by us. We are very proud to win this debate.
Thank you to the government whip for that speech, and I'd like to welcome the final speaker, opposition whip.
Hey, hi, am I audible?
There's a bit of an echo. Can you say that again?
Test.
Yeah, I think this is fine. Sure, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think that the prerequisite that people can be interested in Indonesian culture at the very first place is that we have to gain attention from international community first, right? That's why we have to show the world that we can penetrate into international first, gain attention, then international community can be interested into our culture, right? Under OG, they are only explaining that we are going to give them exposures on it, but there's no guarantee or explanation on why suddenly international people will be interested into Indonesian culture, and we question why, if Indonesian culture is unique and explosive, then it can penetrate into international community better, right? We think that the question are not answered, thus we think that OG already fall, right? OG also talking about how they want to like internationalizing the language on it, but they still want to like opt into the hip hop things. So I think their stance is really flip flop at the very first place, right? And then OO, we think that OO is only talking about on how to the marketing is really taking so much money if we want to internationalize Indonesian culture, and how we have to like get the money as a feedback for internationalizing. Basically, their case is like circulated around money, right? But see, case will be more diverse because we're explaining about like the idea of representation and how it is more sustainable and why the impact is actually better. Actually, OO is only talking about how they want to protect the culture from the international eyes, but the problem is actually internally because the culture is not ready to begin with, which they are never talking about this case, right? Before going on into my class, I'm going to rebut some cases that is coming from teachers, right? CG talk about like how exploitation will happen under our set of tasks. But firstly, within that exploitation, we consider that exploitation will happen under both side of the house, right? Since both side of the house will still have like the similar production house on as well, right? But the difference is under our side of the house is at least it is easier for us to like penetrate with international community, right? So that it can be easily accepted in international people, right? Under your side of the house, exploitation is will be much worse because exactly it is hard to penetrate our value with international value, right? Thus the production house or like the agency will push you even more even exploit you more so that you can actually survive in this really hard competitive international market at the end of the day, right? And then secondly, one of their big case is they're talking about how cultural appropriation will happen under our side of the house, right? Firstly, within that, this is exactly what we are afraid of. What is going to happen if we are trying to internationalizing like our culture, right? Because under your side of the house, since you are internationalizing, the one who is going to do the cultural appropriation will be much more in quantity because it is like the global because it is going to be more like globally, right? And there are side of the house, at least the one who is going to do it, at least like only Indonesian people, right? Within itself or like internet network. But under your side of those, what is going to happen is people will also like doing the cultural appropriation at the end of the day in worldwide, which we do not want that to happen, right? Let's going on into my class. Firstly, let's talk about the idea of representation. Firstly, within that, my first speaker has already said about on how Indonesian culture is not ready to be like internationalized at the very first place, right? Let's see deeper into this. Within that first, buying the government's characterization of Indonesian culture, which is very diverse, the moment that you are trying to internationalize certain culture like batik only, you're gonna left out the other culture, right? Because simply there are too much culture that need to be represented to begin with, right? Opposite side of the house cannot say that you can government side of the house cannot say that, oh, you will represent everyone or you can represent everyone, right? But you cannot make like a lot of a product all at once to begin with, right? You need to always on one thing only, like Japanese batik, and left out Sulawesi or Sumatran traditional batik, so on and so forth, right? The moment that you are doing this as the Indonesian art community, you're gonna be classed internationally by Indonesian people to begin with at the end, right? Simply because you do not represent anyone and everyone at the end, right? Therefore, what you need to focus on is how the Indonesian culture is not actually ready to do it to begin at the end of the day, right? And then secondly, sustainability in international exposure. I think that under government side of the house, they're thinking that we have to push our culture into international community without thinking whether it can penetrate into international community or not, right? And under our side of the house, we think that with non-Indonesian culture, it will be easier for us to penetrate into international community because it is more flexible and not like Indonesian culture, which is already grassrooted and sacred to begin with, right? That is to say that we will have so many ways up for us to market it and can be more flexible following what the international people trend, right? And it will be not like being intervened by the barrier of conservative culture that we have, right? For example, that is to say that we can easily gain more fans, gain more attention, and gain more people that can be interested in Indonesia, right? After that, we can get more attention that not Indonesian first. We think that it eventually will lead people into wanting to know more about Indonesia, right? Why? Because they're already like more interested first from the popular one, like they're going to searching where Nikki is come from and what she's doing in Indonesia and what food she likes, what culture she holds into. That is why at the end it will be like search. People will search more into all culture at the end, right? This is the same like on how K-pop idols start with promoting pop song and penetrating into international community, but then international people try to search about like kimchi, hanbok, bibimbap, so on and so forth, right? That is to say that it has like the trickling down effect at the end of the day. That is why under our side of that, it is going to be much better. So because it will be organic, right? Instead of like we are forcing people to want to know about Indonesia, and at the end it will be more sustainable because because it is the interest is actually coming from their heart at the end of, at the very first place. That is to say that it is not going to be like easily wiped away the interest, right? And then lastly, which side can impact the Indonesian traditional culture better, right? Within that, exactly because we want our culture to go international, to go international and have penetrate into international value. This is going to make our culture being dictated by international world in order to be accepted, right? Which this is harmful because firstly, this is going to like shifting the ori culture, and that is to say that even if under your setup that you succeed on making our culture international, it is still not the ori, right? Not, it is not like our true culture at the very first, at the end of the day. So we think that at the end, this is not quite good because we are not showing our real culture. At the end, we're supposed to oppose.
Thank you to the opposition whip for that speech. Thanks everyone as well for a great debate. Could we stop live streaming? In any case, could the judges please go to the breakout room that I'm going to make right now? And just wait a second. Yeah. But anyway, thank you everyone. Judges, let's deliberate, and once we're done, I'll come back with a call.